from the JLE in London, you're listening to History for the Curious, the podcast. 20 minutes with Rabbi Aubrey Hersh, hosted by myself, Menap Reisner. Join us as we cross continents, sail through the centuries, tracing lives, uncovering events, and following epic journeys to reveal the untold stories and the mysteries that have impacted our history and shaped us into who we are today.
Neville Chamberlain, infamously known for his policy of appeasement towards Hitler in the last couple of years before World War II. He is generally seen as having a spectacular lack of vision and understanding of international politics, which led to him allowing Hitler to take Austria, Czechoslovakia. But the simplistic view is somewhat inaccurate. History books tend to gloss over the fact that even on the 1st of September, when Hitler invaded Poland, Chamberlain held off declaring war for 48 hours. Now, you won't actually find this mentioned even on the internet unless you look at the government records for these 2 days in Parliament. On the 2nd of September, his statement to the House of Commons was so vague, much more so than his cabinet had opted for, that it showed that the British government was still dithering. And in fact, after he spoke, the shock in the House of Commons of his statement was such that there was no sound when the Prime Minister sat down. You didn't hear any of this stuff, and many MPs concluded that the Prime Minister was actively seeking another shabby compromise, a second Munich, just like in September 38. So much so that when the Labour leader, Arthur Greenwood, he was the acting leader of the opposition, he stood up to reply from the opposition benches to Chamberlain's statement, a Conservative MP shouted out across a basically silent Parliament, "Speak for England," meaning that a senior Conservative member of government had to appeal to the socialist opposition to save the nation's honour.
Yeah, you can always understand his will not to have a Second World War.
Yes, but his failure arose from entrenched views that to forestall the threat of communism, concessions can be made to fascism, and his views were marked by the ability to overlook anti-Semitism because he disliked Jews. He said himself at a cabinet meeting in April 39, 6 years after Hitler had already come to power, "If we must offend one side in Palestine, let us offend the Jews rather than the Arabs." And in a letter to his sister in July 39, he writes, "No doubt Jews aren't a lovable people. I don't care about them myself." His policy contained willful denial about dictatorship. In his own words, he was keen to connect with the human side of dictators. And so he failed not only as a leader, but on a moral level too.
Quite the contrast to his predecessors.
Yes. Anthony Eden, who we mentioned was the Foreign Secretary during the Second World War and was PM in the mid-1950s. So Eden's private secretary noted about Eden in the 40s. Unfortunately, Eden is immovable on the subject of Palestine. He loves Arabs and hates Jews. But he became the first patron of the Conservative Friends of Israel. How? The transformation from Foreign Office Arabist came about through his clash with Nasser and Arab radicalism.
So you just did shovel like that.
Yes, that's right. And we will end with two more prime ministers, once again both involved with Israel, and at times of war, the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War. Edward Heath, Conservative Prime Minister from 1970 to 74, and therefore during the war. When Egypt and Syria attacked in 73, the Prime Minister imposed a complete ban on sale of arms to both sides, claiming this to be a policy of even-handedness. Now, this just meant Britain officially was neutral, but the arms embargo hit Israel much harder, and perhaps the most shameful decision was Britain's refusal to supply Israel with spare parts for weapons, including shells for Centurion tanks that Britain had sold to the Jewish state, and all the while Egyptian pilots were continued to be trained by Britain. Really, Heath wanted to appease the oil-producing Arab states and refused to condemn the aggression perpetrated against Israel. Right, this was an Arab attack. In fact, Britain urged a ceasefire, a return to the 67 borders, and refused to allow the US to resupply Israel from British bases such as Cyprus. And Heath met staunch opposition within his own cabinet, including his rival Margaret Thatcher. But Heath was not to be persuaded by argument or by the suggestion that his position was politically unpopular, which was a claim he attributed to a Jewish-inspired press campaign. So he clearly is not just an anti-Zionist, but an anti-Semite to boot. So that's the second of the two. And the first, Harold Wilson, Prime Minister from 67 to 70 and from 74 to 76, a Labour leader. He was a staunch Zionist, which was rather unfashionable amongst the Labour left from whose ranks he came. He wrote a book called The Chariot of Israel, Britain, America and the State of Israel, and that was described by Wilson's Home Secretary Roy Jenkins as one of the most strongly Zionist tracts ever written by a non-Jew. And the hero was Balfour and the villain was Bevin, who Wilson had served with in Attlee's cabinet in 48. And in fact, when Israel faced potential annihilation in the Yom Kippur War, Wilson rushed to its side, lobbying Ted Heath, whom we just mentioned, to lift the arms embargo, and he insisted that the whole Labour Party vote that way. And when Roy Jenkins objected, he said, listen, I've accommodated your conscience for years. You're going to have to take account of mine. I feel as strongly about the Middle East as you do about the common market. And Wilson, in the parliamentary debate, said, listen, Israel is the only democracy in the region. And away from the public stage, Wilson used his close contacts with the Soviet leadership to try and improve the fate of Russian Jews. He refused on one occasion to join them at the Bolshoi, while two of its stars were denied exit visas. And when he left office in 76, his first overseas visit was to Israel, and he received an honorary doctorate. And one of his sharpest contemporary critics said, I don't think Harold Wilson had any doctrinal beliefs except for one, which I find utterly incomprehensible, his devotion to the cause of Israel.
Reminds me of that quote about Churchill before. Similar.
Yes. And finally, Disraeli.
We have done his life story in a previous podcast, I believe, now.
Yes, The Renegades. Not his life story, just one anecdote before we close. Queen Victoria said to Benjamin Disraeli, you were born a Jew, you forsook your great people, and now you are a member of the Church of England, but no one believes that you're a Christian at heart. Who and what are you? Your Majesty, Disraeli replied, I am the blank page between the Old Testament and the New. Okay, so next week, two more prime ministers, one of which will need almost an entire podcast to introduce Jewish life in England in the 1700s.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rabbi Hersh. I've been racking my brains for the opposite of predecessor. I believe it's successor.
It is.
Thank you. We'll look forward to hear the other episodes next week and the week after. Thank you very much again. And as usual, any feedback, comments, reviews, suggestions, please do send to podcast@jle.org.uk. And thank you for listening.